You felt it today. Do not pretend you did not. You saw something, a post, a result, a piece of news about someone you know. And something moved through you that was not admiration. It was not neutral. It was not indifference. It was something that burned, something that made you feel smaller, something that you immediately tried to reframe as, I'm just observing. I'm not jealous. That's not who I am. But it was. And it is. And Friedrich Nietzsche, who spent his entire intellectual life studying the ugliest and most honest truths about human psychology, said that this emotion is the most destructive force operating in most human lives. He gave it a name. He mapped exactly what it does to a person. And his diagnosis is the most uncomfortable thing most people will encounter about themselves. Let's go through it. What Nietzsche called ressentiment. Nietzsche did not use the ordinary word for envy. He used the French term, ressentiment. And the distinction matters. Ordinary envy is relatively simple. You see something someone else has that you want. You feel the desire. That desire can motivate action. It can push you toward building, creating, achieving the thing you want. Used correctly, envy is simply information about what you value. Ressentiment is different. It places emphasis on the humiliation we experience in the face of what we desire but cannot have. Ressentiment is what happens when the envy has nowhere to go. When you see what someone else has. And instead of being moved to pursue it yourself, you are consumed by the gap between their position and yours. When the desire curdles. When it stops being energy and starts being poison. Ressentiment is a festering hatred of life generated by feelings of impotence in the face of an external reality that feels overpowering and threatening. That is the precise psychological state Nietzsche was describing. Not envy in the simple sense. The specific, festering quality of an envy that has given up on action and turned into something much darker. How it begins, without you noticing. The dangerous thing about ressentiment is that it does not feel like what it is. It does not arrive announcing itself as a festering resentment of someone else's success. It arrives wearing reasonable clothing. It arrives as critical analysis, as concerned observation, as the perfectly constructed explanation for why the person who has what you want does not actually deserve it. They got lucky. They had advantages you did not have. Their success is less impressive than it looks. They are not as happy as they appear. They will fail eventually. And when they do, there will be a specific kind of satisfaction in watching it happen. The man of ressentiment is neither sincere, nor naive, nor honest and frank with himself. His soul squints. His spirit loves hiding places, secret passages and back doors. Everything hidden strikes him as his world. Do you recognize that? The tendency to construct elaborate frameworks that explain other people's success as something other than success? The specific pleasure of finding the flaw in someone else's achievement? That is ressentiment at work, and it is far more common than anyone wants to admit, including you. What it does to your mind over time. Here is the part that Nietzsche was most precise about, and most disturbing about. The slave revolt in morality begins when ressentiment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. What he meant was this: when a person cannot compete on the terms of the game, cannot build what they envy, cannot achieve what they desire, the mind does not simply accept the limitation. It inverts the values. It redefines the game so that the person who has what you want is no longer winning. They are now wrong. Their success is now morally suspect. The very qualities that produce their achievement become vices in your analysis. Ambition becomes arrogance. Confidence becomes narcissism. Success becomes evidence of moral failure. And the person doing none of those things, the person sitting still, envying, constructing the framework that justifies their inaction, becomes the virtuous one. This inversion is not conscious. That is what makes it so dangerous. The person experiencing it genuinely believes they are making accurate moral observations. They do not experience it as rationalization. They experience it as clarity. And while they are experiencing it, they are not building anything. The specific person most consumed by it. Nietzsche was precise about who is most susceptible to ressentiment. And the answer is not who most people expect. It is not the person at the bottom. The person who has nothing and has never been close to having anything. Their envy is often too generalized to produce the specific festering quality of ressentiment. The person most consumed by ressentiment is the person who is close, who is talented enough to see the gap clearly, who has enough self-awareness to know they could have done it, but did not, who has enough intelligence to construct sophisticated justifications for why they did not. The presence of ressentiment conjures feelings of envy within the slave towards all those who do not suffer as they do, namely, the higher human beings. This envy motivates the slave to take vengeance on the higher humans. The vengeance is never physical, it is psychological. It is the constant, quiet work of diminishing the person who has what you want. In your own mind, in conversations with others, in the narrative you construct about who deserves success and who does not. And while you are doing that work, the gap grows. Why you cannot build while you are envying. This is the core of Nietzsche's diagnosis. And the most practically important part. Ressentiment is not a passive state. It consumes energy. It requires constant maintenance. The framework must be refreshed every time new evidence arrives that challenges it. Every new success of the envied person must be reinterpreted. Every positive development must be found to have a hidden flaw. That is cognitive work. Real, substantial, continuous cognitive work. Performed by a mind that could be using that energy to build something. For the ressentiment of the noble human being, when it appears in him, runs its course and exhausts itself in an immediate reaction. Therefore, it does not poison. On the other hand, it does not appear at all in countless cases where it is unavoidable in all the weak and powerless. The person who is genuinely building, who is directing their will to power outward toward something real, does not have the surplus energy to maintain ressentiment. The building itself consumes it. The challenge of the real work displaces the consumption of the imaginary one. Ressentiment thrives in the gap between potential and action. It feeds on unused capacity. It grows precisely in proportion to how much you are not doing with what you have. The imaginary revenge mechanism. There is a specific behavior that Nietzsche identified as the most obvious symptom of ressentiment, and that most people will recognize immediately. Imaginary revenge. The ressentiment of natures that are denied the true reaction, that of deeds, compensate themselves with an imaginary revenge. The fantasy of the envied person failing. The rehearsed conversation in which you finally say the thing that exposes them. The scenario in which their success unravels and you are there to observe it without surprise, because you always knew. These fantasies produce a temporary relief, a momentary sense of power in the imagination, and they change absolutely nothing in the actual world. But they are addictive, because they provide the sensation of resolution without the cost of action. The mind receives a portion of what justice would feel like, while producing nothing, changing nothing, building nothing. And every hour spent in that fantasy is an hour not spent on the thing that would actually close the gap. How to identify it in yourself. There is a precise diagnostic question that cuts through the rationalization immediately. When you think about the person you are envying, are you spending more time analyzing why their success is less legitimate than it appears, or planning what you are going to build? The answer is not complicated. It requires honesty. And the honesty itself is where most people stop. Because the moment you admit that you are running the analysis rather than building the thing, you have to confront what that means. And what it means is, you have chosen the comfort of the imaginary revenge over the discomfort of the actual work. That choice is available to everyone. Nietzsche was not judging it from a position of superiority. He spent years in isolation, in pain, working through his own versions of this. But he was precise about what the choice costs. Nietzsche's only way out. The exit from ressentiment is not positive thinking. It is not gratitude practice. It is not telling yourself that you are enough and that comparison is the thief of joy. These are band-aids on a structural problem. The structural solution is the only one that actually works. Redirect the energy outward. Take the force that is currently being spent on analyzing and diminishing someone else's achievement and point it at something real, something you are building, something that will eventually produce evidence that the gap can be closed. Nietzsche called this the will to power in its genuine form, not power over others, the drive to become more than you currently are. Expressed not in the imagination, but in action. He wrote, "Man must be surpassed by himself, not by others, by himself." The person who is genuinely engaged in that surpassing does not have time for ressentiment, because the work is too demanding and too real and too absorbing to leave space for the slow consumption of the imaginary, the question that ends the consumption. There is one question Nietzsche's entire analysis leaves you with, and it is the only one that matters. Right now, today, are you spending more energy on the person who has what you want, or on becoming the person who builds what you want? Not the answer you wish were true. The actual answer. Based on where your thoughts went this morning. Based on what conversations you have had this week. Based on what you have actually done in the last 7 days toward the thing you claim to want. That question, sat with honestly, without the usual rationalizations, is the beginning of the only way out Nietzsche identified. Not the analysis of others. Not the construction of the framework that justifies the gap. The work. The actual, real, imperfect, unglamorous work of building something that is genuinely yours. Start there. If this gave you something useful, subscribe. Philosophy every week. No motivation. No fluff. Just what actually holds up.